Now that we've talked all about roots and the static keyword in detail, let's finish off the work that we started with the roots. And I'd like to pose that to you as a challenge. Can you create static IDs for all of the remaining screens and replace the strings in our main.dart file, similar to how we've done it with the welcome screen? And as part 2 of the challenge, I'd like you to take a closer look at the welcome screen. Notice that there are 2 buttons. At the moment, the buttons do nothing, but needless to say that the top button should send users to the login screen and the other one should send users to the registration screen. As part 2 of this challenge, I'd like you to implement this functionality. Modify the code in the welcome screen.dart file so that when a user presses a button, they can navigate to the corresponding screen. I'll give you a few seconds to pause the video to complete the challenge. Ready? Here's the solution. So for time's sake, I'm going to simply use copy and paste, and I'm going to create this one, which is going to be registration screen. And then I've got one called login screen. And finally, I've got my chat screen. So now that I've created all my static consts in my stateful widgets, I can now come back here and modify all of these hard-coded strings to tap into the actual static property. So that now if I make any typos, then I would get an error and Android Studio would tell me that it doesn't know what I'm talking about, and it would prompt me to fix my errors. So finally, we have our chat screen.id. And now we're done. We have our 4 roots defined. The key is a string, and those strings come from our static consts that are associated with each of these screens. And our values are going to push a particular screen onto our navigation stack. So now if we take a closer look at the welcome screen.dart file, you can see that we've got 2 buttons here. We've got one that says login and another that says register. And when each of these buttons are pressed, we want to go to the respective screens. Now we can use our named roots and static constants to implement the navigation functionality for our 2 buttons on the welcome screen. All we need to do is remove our comments and instead tap into the navigator and use our push named method to push the current context to the root name. And remember, previously we'd been typing hard-coded strings in here, which again, creating more sources of potential errors. Well, in this case, we're going to use our static properties. So when this button, the login button, is pressed, we want to go to the login screen. And for this file to know about the login screen, we of course have to import the login screen. And down here, we can now say login screen dot ID to tap into that static constant property. And now when our login button gets pressed, then we should be pushing the login screen onto the stack. And when our registration button gets pressed, then we should be pushing our registration screen onto the screen. So let's import registration screen as well so that our code no longer has any errors. And finally, let's close that off with a semicolon. So if we run our app now, when I click on the login button, it'll take me to the login screen with the login button. And if I click on the register button, it'll take me to the registration screen. So that's pretty cool. We're using our static constants in order to make our code a little bit safer in this case, and also do it in the most efficient way possible. Now, just a word of warning here that when you created your named roots, if you followed the style that we saw on the Flutter documentation, say we had a login root, a registration root, and a home root, well, that works fine. So whenever we're using this /, if you come from web development, you'll know that to be our different roots. So go to home or go to login or go to registration. And this kind of comes from that URL format, right? Where we have our homepage /registration, etc. But when you're doing this in Flutter, if you have your root start with that /, you must define a root that has nothing after the forward slash. So for example, you can't have something that looks like this. You can't have a /welcome, /login, /registration, and maybe here this one would be a /chat. This will crash your app. And if you try to set the, for example, initial root to the welcome screen, then you can see this is the error that you'll get. You'll get something about a global key was used multiple times inside one child's list. And this is perhaps not the best error message, even though Flutter is really good at giving you precise and clear error messages. In this case, the reason is because if you're going to use that / format, one of these roots has to be /nothing. So that way you can go to /login or /chat or registration, and it will work just fine. So make sure that even if you're using static properties or whatever it may be, if you're declaring it inside here, if you're going to use /, make sure that one of those roots has nothing after the /. But in this case, I think it's actually more clear to do it the way that we did, which is to have a ID for each screen, such as welcome screen or the registration screen, and we don't have to follow that / convention.